All right, I've never been amplified while speaking to so many people. I usually just yell. It's nice. Tell my mother I made it. I am from Nova Scotia. UBC shipped me out to save the salmon, in their words. I'm sort of the last-ditch attempt, I suppose, which is kind of nice, but it's also a lot of pressure. But I'm sort of handling it well, based on what I've seen. So, as Andrew was mentioning, the main culprit for the low survival to adulthood in Chinook salmon has been identified as the harbor seal, this adorable little fella. And honestly, that has been suspected to have led to a decrease in southern resident whale numbers as a result of the low survival to adulthood and subsequent low supply of adults to that diet. Yet, that's boring, and I think that's way too simple. So I said, you know what else is going on? And basically what our initial findings from this study have found is that actually heron are intercepting a large portion of Chinook smolts prior to them being introduced to the seals in the estuary. So basically, the herons are beating the seals to the punch, and that has been overlooked in a lot of the studies. So basically, herons are actually highly social birds that nest in really close quarters near reliable food sources during nesting season, during breeding season. And actually this colonial nesting allows for a rapid transfer of information throughout the flock, as well as it facilitates the formation of large aggregates at optimal feeding arrangements and events, such as salmon migrations. Yet, to date, there's been very little analysis of what the actual impact of heron predation is on salmon survival. And this is largely due to the fact that salmon bones are completely broken down in the digestive tract of heron, which makes a very easy study extremely complicated. So the way we addressed that problem was basically we tagged over the last 4 years, from 2014 to 2017, we've tagged about 10,000 outmigrating Chinook smolts a year, both in the river as well as in the estuary. And from the first 3 years of this study, we actually saw that survival out of the river is really low, about 35% on average, and it's dependent on flow. So, based on what we had seen on survival throughout the river, we had suspected that it was likely predation throughout the river. So, I would love to say, first things first, I said, oh, you know what, it must be the herons, and let's go check that, and got these results that I'm boasting now. But in reality, I checked everything else first. And then the salmon had actually moved out of the river, the smolts had moved out of the river into the estuary, and we were starting to look into seal predation, and particular seal predation on log booms. And one of the guys that I was getting a ride out to the log booms with was actually a biologist with Couch and Tribes, the local Aboriginal committee. And what we had seen, he asked, hey, Zach, so how's the study going? I said, oh, I would love to say it's going amazing, but in reality, I think I'm going to get fired. And he said, you know what, I've got an idea that might just save you, and it did. What he said was, have you checked the local heron rookery? It's like 5 minutes from where I just picked you up. I said, absolutely, I thought about it, of course, but I hadn't done it yet. And so directly after I got off the boat that day, sprinted over to the heron rookery, realized I had almost no energy, but I'd still give it a try at least. So I want to emphasize the fact that I was working for 4 months and had found 0 tags in any otter latrines, mink dens, merganser hangouts, all sorts of places I was checking. Found absolutely no tags. In this one, I think it was like a 30-minute scan, I found about 64 tags. And so I called my mom and I said, cancel the flight and I'm staying. And basically, I went back with a little bit more motivation and a couple of power bars and did a full scan over a couple of days and actually found 406 individual tags. This represents just about 5% of the fish that actually make it to the bottom 5 kilometers of the river. And actually, when you do this data analysis, I just want to show you a picture of how happy I am doing this stuff. This isn't a lack of motivation to smile. This is actually like every time I smile, I get heron detritus in my mouth. So I am happy. I'm bubbling with happiness, actually. And that's another one where I was told to be more safe. And basically, what we see when we look at these data is that not only are we seeing a large amount of predation, but because we've done tagging both in the river as well as in the estuary, we were actually able to identify the areas where they're feeding, which happens to be the lower river, where a lot of the literature was suggesting that it was both the lower river and the estuary. We suggest that it actually may be primarily in the lower river. Not only that, but we actually see that predation by herons is heavily correlated to flow, where you see really high levels of predation success during low flow years. We hypothesize that this may actually be because herons are limited to feeding in 16 centimeters or less of water. So during low flow conditions, it may actually increase access to foraging areas, which can actually have a lot of easy solutions compared to the other ones like culling seals. Instead, we could actually just manipulate water flow, which is already being done at the mill, or being controlled by the mill at the top of the river. And this could be actually an easy, gotcha, thanks everybody. Which could actually be a really easy solution to this is just maintaining the flow above a certain critical level, which we can extrapolate from our data. Another interesting thing is that that's pretty much everything we found. And especially because I don't have that much time anymore. So anyways, I'd like to acknowledge everybody that, lifted me up into this position of greatness. And for that, I thank them. Andrew Treitz for recruiting me, showed up at my house, sat with my mother and said, you know what, this kid's going places and he's got to get out of this house for one thing. Anyways, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's exciting, and I'll tell you more some other time.
So, do we have any questions? Any concerns?
Yeah.
There we go. Question back here.
Have you only looked at one heron rookery, or have you looked at all the other established?
Yeah, so we looked at all of the rookeries within about a 25 kilometer radius. The literature suggests that herons absolutely refuse to go past 15 kilometers to feed from their rookery. And what we actually found was in the closest rookery, or the second closest rookery, which is about 10 kilometers away, we found one tag, and a rookery that was actually about 22 kilometers away, we found 3 tags. Yeah, that might actually not be the case, and this is the first time we have the technology to actually address that.
Thanks very much, Zach.
Hey, thank you.